Hello and welcome to section 2 of our online class for Introduction to Ethics. In this second section, we're going to start in our analysis of the Wizard of Oz. In particular, in this section, we're going to look at the Scarecrow. So for this section, there's various materials throughout this that I'd like you to take a look at. First, read the Scarecrow packet, and within the Scarecrow packet, there's various readings I'd like you to take a look at. Also, we have various videos, so kind of go through there. Like the other sections, we'll have some reading quizzes about halfway through, and then of course at the very end we'll have the folios that I'd like you to fill out. This first section for the Wizard of Oz is an interesting one in that for the coward, or for the Scarecrow, he's sort of got the same issue we do. His interest is he needs a brain. He needs a brain so that he can make good decisions. And in a similar way, in a democratic system, a system like we live, we need to have the ability to make good decisions. So what turns out is our collective brain. What is it that we actually use to make good decisions? And I think arguably the thing that we get information from in order to make democratic choices, in order to make choices about our lives, we typically call the media, the mass media. The mass media includes things like newspapers, magazines, TV news, cable news. It has increasingly come to also include various internet sources. Indeed, I think more and more people are getting information either from their news feeds on their phone or by looking at, let's say, Facebook or other forms of social media. But the media also includes publishing houses, books, again, blogs. All of these things collectively are places that we go to get information. And I think our question here in this section is whether or not the information that we're getting from the media can be reliable. Is it trustworthy? Is it what it is it actually tells us it is? The first reading we're going to do in this section has to do with Hitler. And the reason we're going to read Hitler is that it seems as though, if we're going to ask the question whether or not there's propaganda in our own process, we ought to go to someone who, historically, a lot of people thought was a very good user of propaganda. And Hitler was very good, sort of unarguably. He lays out in his chapter called War Propaganda from his book Mein Kampf what he thinks the various elements of effective propaganda are. So I think the argument here is that if we read Hitler and we're able to see the various elements, right, that propaganda is supposed to have, if we in turn look at our own media and are able to find those various elements, I think that's fairly good evidence that perhaps propaganda is alive and well in our own news media. Albeit it's very, very different than the sort of propaganda that Hitler proposed. Hitler was controlling, right, their group of people controlling the media to serve a particular goal. In America, in American process, I suspect it's really, really different. Instead of it being a conspiracy, again, a group of people purposely misleading us, one could argue that the misrepresentation in the American process are a result of how the institutions are structured. And for this sort of institutional analysis, we're going to go to a very meaningful source. We're going to look at Noam Chomsky. He co-authored a book, the title of which was Manufacturing Consent. And in that text, he laid out what he called a propaganda model. And in his propaganda model, he tracks information from its source out in the world to, let's say, what shows up on your television or your newspaper. And his argument is that news, as it travels through, that pipeline goes through various what he calls filters. And he lists 5 of them. He talks about the ownership of the media, which is relevant because in our culture, the news is almost entirely for profit. That is, corporations use news as a way to generate money. The second filter is the actual way in which this group makes money, not through subscriptions, not by us paying for news, but really selling audiences to advertisers. So we'll take a look at the effect that advertising and revenue generation has to do, again, with the content of the news. His third filter has to do with sourcing and where we actually get the content that fills up the paper or fills up the news program. Again, in a business model, we'd like to cut our expenses as much as possible, and it's going to cost news agencies money to get content. So in that section, we'll take a look at, well, how does the news media actually decrease their expenses, and what, if any, effects does that have on the information that you get? The fourth filter that he talks about is what he calls FLAC. It has to do with anticipated responses. And finally, his fifth filter, albeit it's a little dated, or at least it was dated, maybe it's coming back. He says it's the whole anti-communism world, Red Scare, Cold War filter, which was relevant at the time Chomsky was writing. Since then, communism has decreased greatly in our sort of public consciousness. And what I'll try to do is I'll try to argue that anti-terrorism more or less fulfills the exact same sort of dynamic, the same functional role that anti-communism played for a while. If you take a look at the media, we often see criticisms of the media in the media itself. And one of the common criticisms is almost humorous. That is how liberal, right, our media is, and it's run by a bunch of liberals. Again, really, really odd, because I'm not aware of any labor unions that actually own TV networks or news gathering corporations. The news, again, is almost entirely owned by extremely large corporations. Those large corporations are more or less governed by the principal investors of those corporations. And as we've seen in America, there's been a huge increase in the amount of overall wealth that the top 1% has. So the 1% is more or less owning the news as a way to use the news as a way to make more money for themselves. And again, it seems really odd that that top 1% would really be considered liberal. Perhaps maybe they have some socially liberal views, maybe that's what people are talking about. But as far as, sort of pro-capitalism, pro-system, all that, it seems fairly easy. The group that owns the media and controls it probably has a fairly narrow political view. So we'll take a look at this section. I'll post a couple more videos. One of the videos that I'll post here in a bit will really try to take apart that role of profit and how profit ends up affecting the content of the news. But again, I think I've added a few things in here that you'll find interesting, and hopefully it'll give you a set of tools to examine the source of this information that you're looking at when you get information. Because arguably you are an incredibly important human. You're a voter, or you're a resident of one of the most influential countries in the world. It seems to me that the way folks in America vote is going to have more of an effect on the world than, let's say, how the people in Australia vote, right? So this gives to you an added responsibility. A responsibility to check up on the news, to make sure that the information that you're getting is correct, to make sure it's a complete story, to make sure it's accurate. Again, because you're going to use that information as a basis to make, again, not only decisions about your own life, about your own career, but as part of a member of a democracy, you're going to be making choices that affect our entire planet. So again, I think that this section is really relevant. I think it fits really, really well with a class like this, where we're taking a look at contemporary and social moral issues. So happy reading. Take a look at those videos, and we'll check back in from time to time to see how you're going on all of it. Good luck.